Hello. So we're back discussing the yellow wallpaper. We're going to dive into the text today. And based on these questions from last time, who is the woman in the wallpaper? What allegorical elements or social commentary? How is the act of tearing the wallpaper down a feminist act? What could creeping around symbolize? And most importantly, how does point of view impact the story? Okay, so before we dive into the text, though, I do want to show you a quick video. Bear with me a second here. So we know that Charlotte Perkins Gilman was very concerned with gender roles. And so I think a helpful lens going into this story to understand where she's coming from a little better will be this quick video on Simone de Beauvoir's Second Sex, it's called, and about how gender and femininity is a social construct. And I think it gives us a good framework to dive into the text.
Welcome to the McCat Multimedia Series, a McCat analysis of Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex. One is not born a woman, but becomes one. French existentialist and feminist philosopher Simone de Beauvoir wrote The Second Sex in 1949 to investigate popular definitions of femininity. She concluded that those definitions had been used to suppress women through the ages. For de Beauvoir, the views of individuals are socially and culturally produced. Femininity is not inherent, it is a construct that has been learned through socialization to keep men dominant. De Beauvoir argued that women have historically been treated as inferior and secondary to men for three reasons. She explained that society teaches women, 1, to fulfill a male's needs and therefore exist in relation to men, and 2, to follow external cues to seek validation of their worth. Her third point was that females have historically had far fewer legal rights and therefore less public influence. De Beauvoir uses a comparison, saying that a girl is treated like a live doll. What did she mean? A doll is a powerful means of identification. Through it, the girl learns to identify with the condition of being dressed up, made pretty and preened over, whilst not having any agency of her own. She learns to objectify herself, just as men objectify women. The doll is submissive. Its role is to be dressed up, listen to its owner's secrets, comfort her when she is lonely, and lie at home when she is at school. De Beauvoir argues that when the girl grows up, she will find herself in the same situation as her doll. As a woman, it will be her role to attract a husband with her beauty, and to maintain it to ensure he doesn't stray, to quietly listen to his problems, and wait at home for him when he's at work. An accessory, be it plastic or flesh and blood. De Beauvoir stated that even if a woman didn't marry, she would still be held to male standards through external pressures such as the beauty, diet, and fashion industries, which are all complicit in perpetuating the objectification of women. To achieve liberation, de Beauvoir believed women must recognize many of these social norms as constructions. Only then will they have the freedom to escape their context and determine their own destiny. Written against a backdrop of intense conservatism, The Second Sex was published just 5 years after French women had been granted the right to vote, at a time when few women worked. De Beauvoir's argument that one is not born but rather becomes a woman is still valid today. A more detailed examination of her ideas can be found in...
Okay, so I think what you can see there are some connections from Georgiana to even Kugelmass and Madame Bovary. to Connie, this idea that women are, and her sister, that women are supposed to fulfill certain roles for the purpose of fulfilling males. And then in order to do that, they often self-objectify, which I've mentioned before. Objectification is often the first step towards violence. That it's a lot harder to commit violence against a person than it is to something you view as an object. So when women self-objectifies, it often leads to a form of self-violence, from cutting to eating disorders, etc. And so Simone de Beauvoir, she argued that the first thing we need to do is make these constructs, these structures, visible, that we must understand them in order to help women transcend them. And this would be very similar to how Charlotte Perkins Gilman would think of the same issues. This idea that we need to bring these social roles to light, that it's not till we begin talking about women in the domestic sphere and women having to depend on men financially until we bring that to light and talk about it, analyze it, and challenge it, that we can start these changes. So I think de Beauvoir is a very useful lens to look at this text. Okay, so let's dig in. Like most short stories and most of the ones we've looked at this semester, this is a very dense text with a lot of meaning, a lot of different levels. So let's dive in. It is very seldom that more ordinary people like John and myself secure ancestral halls for the summer. Okay, remember those first words are in a short story are so important. So the first person she mentions is John, right? And then she mentions myself. So no specific name. Him first, and she doesn't have a name. A colonial mansion, a hereditary estate, I would say a haunted house, and reach the height of romantic felicity, but that would be asking too much of fate. Still, I will probably declare that there's something queer about it. Okay, so hopefully by now you notice in there some foreshadowing, right? So we have haunted house. That's a weird thing to say about this place, right? And that there's something queer about it. So we have some foreshadowing. Also, we're not going to focus on this semester, but the introduction of a colonial mansion. This is now post-colonial story is something we could investigate, and what this means about after when a colonizer leaves. And you could interpret the story in that way. But we're not going to do that. Also, throughout this story, you'll see comparisons of romantic, right? This idea of the supernatural, imaginative. Romantics also were wild. They believed nature should be wild and untamed, and valued the emotional, the chaotic over the ordered, over the logic, over, so you'll see this tension between the romantic view of the world versus a more logical view of the world. Else, why should it be let so cheaply? And why have it stood so long untenanted? Okay, so cheap, and nobody's lived there. John laughs at me, of course, but one expects that in a marriage, right? So you think, oh yeah, of course there's laughter in a marriage, but the way that's written, it almost sounds like belittling, right? A belittling laughter. John is practical in the extreme. So again, John, first information we get about him is he's laughs at her in a belittling way, and he's practical, logical. He has no patience with faith, an intense horror of superstition, and he scoffs openly at any talk of things not to be felt and seen and put down in figures. So he is not a man of romantic sensibility, all those unmeasurable qualities. He is a man of logic and reason, right? John is a physician, and perhaps, I would not say it to a living soul, of course, but this is dead paper and a great relief to my mind. Perhaps that is one reason I do not get well faster. Okay, just a moment here. This is one of those meta-fiction moments in that you could say Charlotte Perkins Gilman is almost writing this about herself, that writing this on paper is a relief. It's therapy, right? So it's kind of a metafiction moment. You see, he does not believe I'm sick. And what can one do? So if the logical, if the doctor does not believe that you're sick, well, how do you get treatment then, right? How do you get help? If a physician of high standing so our Marxist radar should pop there, and one's own husband assures friends and relatives that there is really nothing the matter with one but temporary nervous depression, a slight hysterical tendency, what is one to do? So again, remember hysterical, womb, a woman-like tendency, right? My brother is also a physician and also of high standing, and he says the same thing. So I take phosphates or phosphites, whichever it is, and tonics and journeys and air and exercise, and absolutely forbidden to work until I'm well again. Personally, I disagree with their ideas. Personally, I believe that congenial work with excitement and change would do me good. But what is one to do? Okay, so what's interesting here, through the framework we've been looking all semester, it's almost like a shogunai. She's almost like the cat, and I'm a cat being swung around by the student. Her fate is out of her hands because the men, the reason, the upper class are telling her what to do. It's fated. I did write for a while in spite of them, but it does exhaust me a good deal, having to be so sly about it, or else meet with heavy opposition. So writing is getting heavy opposition, right? This thing that she views as therapeutic, as helpful, is getting opposition. I sometimes fancy that in my condition, if I had less opposition and more society and stimulus, but John says the very worst thing I can do is think about my condition, and I confess it always makes me feel bad. Notice there, she interrupts her own thought, right? So John is almost like a force in her own mind, right? So if we get out of this story and we view this as social commentary, it's saying the patriarchal rules, the patriarchal structure is policing in our own mind. We talked about this earlier in the semester with Foucault's idea of the panopticon, right? This idea of the prison guards watching the prisoners, and then you could slowly remove the prison guards and the prisoners would still behave, or how we self-police in many different ways. So the patriarchy, represented by John, is in her head in the middle of a thought saying, stop being ridiculous. So I'll let it alone and talk about the house. The most beautiful place. It is quite alone, standing well back from the road, quite 3 miles from the village. It makes me think of English places that you read about, for there are hedges and walls and gates that lock, and lots of separate little houses for the gardeners and people. Okay, so I want you to think about this scene, about the description here. Think about what it sounds like. What's this place with hedges and walls and gates and locks and little separate houses? What's that remind you of? Right? What could it be in reference to? But it's also part of that binary opposition we were just talking about with reason on one side and emotion on the other. And in this case, it's not wild nature. It's not artistic and crazy looking houses. It's very ordered. Gates, hedges, ordered, controlled nature. So at this point in the story, if we were looking at that binary opposition, you'd say that side's winning. That side is privileged. There's a delicious garden. I never saw such a garden, large and shady, full of box-bordered paths and lined with long grape-covered arbors with seats under them. There are greenhouses too, but they're all broken now. Okay, so again, ordered logic. But greenhouses were broken. So ordered nature was broken. So there's cracks in the patriarchy, right? There's cracks in that part of the binary. There's a problem. There was some legal trouble, I believe, something about the heirs and co-heirs, and anyhow, the place has been empty for years. That spoils my ghostliness. Again, return to that supernatural. I'm afraid, but I don't care. There's something strange about the house, and I can feel it. I even said so to John one moonlit evening, but he said what I felt was a draft and shut the window. Okay, so moonlight as a symbol. You want to think of the moon as a symbol of nighttime, of eeriness, of supernatural, like we think of it as werewolves, right? It's the opposite of reason. The root word for moon is luna, right? Which is also the basis of lunatic, right? Craziness. We get crazy when the moon's out. And so when the moon's out, that's challenging the reason, the other side of the binary. But John stepped in and said, nope, forget that, and shuts out the moonlight, shuts out the craziness. Okay. And by the way, that's what's called like a close reading. That's called, where we're analyzing the symbols as we're reading. I get unreasonably angry with John sometimes. I'm sure I never used to be so sensitive. I think it's due to this nervous condition. But John says if I feel so, I shall neglect proper self-control. So I take pains to control myself, before him at least, and that makes me feel very tired. So again, self-policing, panopticon-like control. I don't like our room a bit. I wanted one downstairs that opened on the piazza and had roses all over the window and such pretty old-fashioned chintz hangings. But John would not hear of it. So chintz hangings, so hangings from other places, from foreign lands. So something different, something not ordered, something that would challenge the structure of society. He said there was only one window and not room for two beds, and no near room for him if he took another. He is very careful and loving and hardly lets me stir without special direction. I have a scheduled prescription for each hour in the day. He takes all care for me, and so I feel basely ungrateful to not value it more. Okay, so think of this in terms of what we were talking about with where you go and where you've been, and this idea that women need to submit to men, and in this case, submit to reason, submit to a higher class, submit to order, right? And so not submitting to that is not something that you're supposed to do. Describing the room, it was nursery first and then playroom and gymnasium. I should judge, for the windows are barred for little children and there are rings and things in the walls. The paint and paper look as if boys' school had used it. It's stripped off. One of those sprawling, flamboyant patterns committing every artistic sin in the wallpaper. It is dull enough to confuse the eye in following, pronounced enough to constantly irritate and provoke study, and when you follow the lame, uncertain curves for a little distance, they suddenly commit suicide, plunge off at outrageous angles, destroy themselves in unheard of contradictions. Okay, so again, you can see how reading this story with the idea of binary opposition in mind helps you really see what's going on at a deeper level, right? Because you can read it at surface level and get plenty out of it and be a very valuable reading. But you can see the tension of the story. The deeper meanings come out when you use things like binary oppositions. So here, all the order and structure of her day, ordered by John or the outside of the house, this wallpaper is the opposite. It commits every artistic sentence. It irritates, it provokes study. And the curves commit suicide and plunge off, right? And it's full of contradictions. Well, contradictions, that goes against reason, right? And the commit suicide and plunge off, ooh, that's some eerie foreshadowing. Good. It is a dull yet lurid orange in some places, a sickly sulfur tint in others. No wonder the children hated it. I should hate it myself if I had to live in this room long. There comes John, and I must put this away. He hates to have to have me write a word. John is away all day, and even some nights when his cases are serious. I'm glad my case is not serious. Hopefully you can pick out what that is too at this point. Irony, right? Obviously her case is serious. Obviously what's going on is serious. But because John doesn't think so, her self-policing is saying, no, not serious. John does not know how much I really suffer. He knows there is no reason to suffer, and that satisfies him. Right? So again, if you were to pull out in social commentary on patriarchy, that gets at some tough issues. That because men don't understand women, often they just will excuse, and say, she's just being silly. She's just, that sort of thing. Of course, it's only nervousness. It does weigh on me so not to do my duty in any way. I meant to be such a help to John, such a real rest and comfort, and here I am, a comparative burden already. Nobody would believe what an effort it is to do what little I'm able, to dress and entertain and order things. And yet I cannot be with him. It makes me so nervous. I suppose John never was nervous in his life. He laughs at me so about this wallpaper. Again, that doesn't sound like a healthy relationship, right? At first he meant to repaper this room, but afterwards he said that I was letting it get the better of me, and that nothing was worse for my nervous patient than to give way to such fancies. Sorry, my coughs are growing more frequent, so bear with the pauses. He said that after the wallpaper was changed, it would be the heavy bedstead, and then the barred windows, and then the gate at the head of the stairs, and so on. Boy, this sounds like a weird place, huh? Think about that. Think about this description and what it's trying to get at here. The place is doing you good, he said. And really, dear, I don't care to renovate the house just for a 3 months rental. So she's saying to get rid of the heavy bedposts and the barred windows and the gate at the head of the stairs. And he's saying, no, we're only going to be here 3 months. But he is right enough about the beds and windows. So that self-monitoring John is in her head. I'm really getting quite fond of the big room, all but that horrid paper. So in other words, she still sees herself from the lens of the patriarchy. She still sees herself from the lens, from John's point of view, and says, from John's point of view, that paper's horrible. Out of one window, I can see the garden, those mysterious deep-shaded arbors and riotous old-fashioned flowers and bushes and gnarly trees. Now that's nature that challenges that order, that challenges that structure, right? That challenges all that. Shows the other side of nature, the romantic side of nature. And romantic not as in how we think of it as pure romance and love, but romantic as in embracing the emotional, the imaginative, the creative, the opposite of reason, structure, or organization. There's beautiful shaded lane that runs down there from the house. He says that with my imaginative power and habit of story making, a nervous weakness like mine is sure to lead to an all matter of excited fancies, and that I ought to just use my will and good sense to check this tendency, so I try. Now, think back to earlier this summer session where we have Kugelmoss, who was told not to go with his fancies, right? But what were his fancies? His fancies were to go have this crazy love affair, cheating on his wife, right? Then we're told the same with Madame Bovary. But what were her fancies? Her fancies were to get out of her social standing, to get out of her, rise above her social class. So that's a little more interesting there on whether that's fancies you want to ignore or not, right? Then we have what we have is her fancies have to do with anything that isn't reason based, right? Anything that goes against structure, norms, patriarchy, and she's being told to ignore those fancies. So I try. I think sometimes that if I were only well enough to write a little, it would relieve the press of ideas and rest me. And again, metafiction. Charlotte Perkins Gilman saying, writing is a good cure for you women, right? That writing is an escape. Writing is a way of therapy. Writing is a way to challenge ideas that you disagree with. When I get really well, John says we'll ask cousin Henry and Julia down for a long visit. But he says he would as soon put fireworks in my pillowcase as to let me have those stimulating people about now. I wish I could get well faster, but I must not think about that. This paper looks to me as if I knew what a vicious influence it had. There's a recurrent spot where the pattern lulls like a broken neck and two bulbous eyes stare at you upside down. Well, that's disturbing. Again, foreshadowing, again, that from his point of view, from the lens that she's seeing the world in currently, it looks evil. I get positively angry with the impertinence of it and the everlastingness. Up and down and sideways they crawl, and those absurd, unblinking eyes are everywhere. There is one place, let's skip down. I suppose when this was used as a playroom, they had to take the nursery things out, and no wonder. I never saw such ravages as the children had made there. Wallpaper's torn off. The floor is scratched and gouged and splintered, and plaster itself is dug out here and there. And this great heavy bed, which is all we found in the room, looks as if it had been through wars. Start adding up this description, right? The gates, the locks, the ordered bushes, well-manicured bushes, the little buildings, the gate at the end of the stairs, the heavy bed, the barred windows, the scratches and tearing at the walls and floors. Start adding that all up and start thinking about that a little bit here. But I don't mind it a bit. Only the paper. There comes John's sister. Such a dear girl as she is, and so careful of me. I must not let her find me writing. She is perfect and enthusiastic housekeeper and hopes for no better profession. I verily believe she thinks it is the writing which has made me sick. But I can write when she is out, and I see her a long way off from these windows. Okay, so his sister is like Connie from Where You Go and Where Have You Been? Connie's sister. so fulfills the gender expectations. But for her, she's saying John's sister believes that it's the writing that makes her sick. What's writing symbolic of? Writing is symbolic of ideas, of imagination, of power, right? It's this idea that through writing we can express ourselves, right? And she's saying that's what makes her sick. So John's sister has internalized the gender norms and the norms of the day, and is saying, woman, don't challenge the power. You're not supposed to have your own ideas. You're not supposed to have your own imagination, right? That must be what's making you hysterical or womb-like. This wallpaper has a kind of sub-pattern in a different shade, a particularly irritating one, for you can only see it in certain lights and not clearly then. But in the places where it isn't faded and where the sun is just so, I can see a strange, provoking, formless sort of figure that seems to skulk about behind that silly and conspicuous front design. There's sister on the stairs. So again, still at this point, sees the wallpaper as a negative. Well, the 4th of July is over. The people are all gone and I'm tired out. John thought it might do me some good to see a little company, so we just had Mother and Nellie and the children down for a week. Of course, I didn't do a thing. Jenny sees to everything now, but it tired me out all the same. John says if I don't pick up faster, he shall send me to the Ver Mitchell in the fall. But that's that rest cure guy. But I don't want to go there at all. I had a friend who was in his hands once, and she says he is just like John and my brother, only more so. So what she's saying is this Ver Mitchell guy, John and her brother are all of the same, right? So this is like, if you were just reading this and you weren't getting all the social commentary or the meta stuff here, this would be a point where you want to clue in. Okay, this guy who's known for representing patriarchy and putting down women and infantilizing women is tied together with the male characters in the story. So, saying this isn't just about these specific men. This is about mankind. And I'm getting dreadfully fretful and querulous. I cry at nothing and cry most of the time. Of course, I don't when John is here or anybody else, but when I'm alone. And I'm alone a good deal now. John is kept in town very often, but serious cases. So, what's crying? But it represents emotion. It often helps us purge things. It helps us feel better afterwards, right? But in masculine society, you're not supposed to show yourself cry. Right? You're not supposed to let those feelings or emotions come out. So she can only do it alone. I'm getting really fond of the room in spite of the wallpaper. Perhaps because of the wallpaper, it dwells in my mind so. Okay, so there's a shift here in her attitude towards the wallpaper. I lie here on this great immovable bed. It's nailed down. Okay, keep adding that to your description. I believe and follow the pattern about by the hour. It is as good as gymnastics, I assure you. I will stay at the bottom down in the corner over where it has not been touched. And I determine for the 1000th time that I will follow that pointless pattern to some sort of conclusion. I know a little of the principal design, and I know this thing was not arranged on any laws of radiation or alternation or repetition or symmetry or anything else I've ever heard of. So it challenges all the rules of society. So in that way, you can already see the wallpapers becoming symbolic of challenging norms, of challenging society, of challenging reason, of challenging patriarchy or masculinity in this point. Looked at in one way, each breath stands alone. The bloated curves and flourishes, a kind of debased Romanesque, with delirium tremens, go waddling up and down in isolated columns of fatuity. Okay, a lot of big words there. So, a debased Romanesque, so a perverted Roman-like quality. Romanesque has a very particular definition, but we're going to keep it simple there and just say that. With delirium tremens, meaning delirium tremens is when you're like kind of sick or crazy and your body starts shaking. So saying a crazy, sick shaking. But on the other hand, they connect diagonally, and the sprawling outlines run off in great slanting waves of optic horror, like a lot of wallowing seaweeds in full chase. Again, horror should be a foreshadowing word. It's grotesque. Headlong plunges. I don't know why I should write this. I don't want to. I don't feel able, and I know John would think it absurd, but I must say what I feel and think in some way it is such a relief. But I must say what I feel and think in some way it is such a relief, right? There's where we really see a pivotal moment in the story. This is the moment where she's taking her agency and she says, I can't. She shakes off. Her thought doesn't get interrupted by her John thoughts, right? She finally says, I can't take it anymore. I must let out what I feel and think, right? So that's a huge pivotal point in the story. I must resist and I must let out who I am. And dear John gathered me up in his arms and just carried me upstairs and laid me on my bed and sat by me and read to me till it tired my head. So again, weak and submissive woman must be helped and carried by strong man. And it's also symbolic of the honeymoon. You know, we're supposed to carry someone over the threshold, so there's a marriage element here. He said I was his darling and his comfort and all he had, and that I must take care of myself for his sake and keep well. He says no one but myself can help me out of it, that I must use my will and self-control and not let any silly fancies run away with me. So I just want to pause here and just mention, I've mentioned this before in other texts, but when we're talking about patriarchy and feminism and masculinity, men can often get defensive, right? And I think this is a good place to point out, no one's saying the men here are evil. They're not saying that he's purposely trying to hurt her. It's actually the opposite here. He is trying to help her. He's doing all he knows how to do to help her, right? He is doing what society has taught him to do to help her. He's trying to be a good person. So it's not men hating or men are evil or anything like that. It's we must question society and say, really, is this a healthy course of action? Now, you could come out and say, yeah, it is, okay? And that's completely, everyone can have different thoughts on that sort of thing, whatever. But feminists want you to realize these cultural productions that are happening, and that by bringing them to light, then we can make honest decisions about which ones are right or wrong or should be changed, right? But only by bringing them to light can we truly understand them. Behind the outside pattern, the dim shapes get clearer every day. It is always the same shape, always very numerous. And it's like a woman stooping down and creeping behind that pattern. Okay, so now the wallpaper, there's a woman there. I don't like it a bit, I wonder. I begin to think I wish John would take me away from here. Okay, so that John in her head, that panopticon like John, is fighting its way back in. You know, she said, I must say how I feel, I must say how I am. Well, apparently it's not a clean break. It's not a clean, this is who I am now, because you know what? Patriarchy and our society and cultural norms are very tempting. to stick with. An example I give of this is in my one of my graduate programs. I was in a group of very hardcore feminists, right? I actually wrote my master's thesis from a French feminist perspective, and there was a good somewhere 10 to 12 women and a couple of men who just really wanted to challenge all these ideas and just believed with them, embodied them, and wanted to fight against patriarchal structure. So now 15 years later or so, I keep in touch with a lot of them. And most of them during that time, the women in particular, said, I will never participate in the oppressive marriage rituals or taking the husband's name or the bridal veil, the giving away of the daughter, all those things that indicate ownership in the marriage ceremony. After 15 years, I think all but one of them is married now, right? And almost all of them ended up doing all those traditional marriage ceremony traditions. And you could say, man, see, they've sold out. Or, hey, they're weak, or something like that, right? But it's not the case. When you're around for each one of those things, when you see the whole context, what you see is for even people who've lived for decades strongly believing something, the cultural pressures are hard to resist. So you might firmly believe, I'm never taking my husband's name. Well, if the mother-in-law starts crying or is upset over it, well, that may make you start to rethink it. Well, if all of a sudden you have to answer a couple hundred questions, what do you mean you're not taking your husband's name? What do you mean this isn't the case? That gets tiring, right? And there's tremendous social pressure on it. And so after a while, you start to question and say, oh man, I know this is important. I believe it's important for so long, but man, it would be so much easier just to go with the norms, right? And our brains also reward us when we go with norms, as we've talked about this semester. So, and that's what these authors are trying to bring to light here, is that these are so ingrained in our society, they're incredibly hard to resist. And so even the women themselves who are trying to escape these pressures, they have Johns in their heads, right? They have panopticons in their heads. It is so hard to talk with John about my case because he is so wise and because he loves me so. But I tried it last night. It was moonlight. The moon shines in all around just as the sun does. Okay, so this is different than the last time with the moon. The last time John closed out the moon, right? This time it's everywhere. It surrounds the eerie supernatural, the resist reason, the lunacy is everywhere. And John was asleep and I hated to waken him, so I kept still and watched the moonlight on the undulating wallpaper till I felt creepy. The faint figure behind seemed to shake the pattern, just as if she wanted to get out. What is it, little girl, he said. Don't go walking around like that, you'll get a cold, John said. So the patriarchal figure calls her little girl. Now this is a full-grown woman. This isn't like Connie, 15-year-old teenager, right, or young woman. This is a fully grown married woman being called a little girl. But you really are better, dear, whether you can see it or not. I'm a doctor, dear, and I know. You are gaining flesh and color. Your appetite is so better. I feel really much easier about you. I don't weigh a bit more, said I, nor as much. And my appetite may be better in the evening when you're here, but it's worse in the morning when you're away. Bless your little heart. Again, patronizing, like little girl, your little heart, right? Don't believe your own eyes. That's just silly hysterics. My darling, said he, I beg you, for my sake and for our child's sake, as well as for your own, that you'll never for one instant let that idea enter your mind. So she had said, better in body, perhaps, but not in mind. And he's saying, don't even start to say that your mind isn't better. There's nothing so dangerous, so fascinating to a temperament like yours. It is a false and foolish fancy. Can you not trust me as a physician when I tell you so? On a pattern like this, by day, there is a lack of sequence, a defiance of law that is constant irritant in a normal mind. So during the day, when reason is supposed to, and structure is supposed to rule, that wallpaper pattern is always there. And she used to just find it as a negative, and now it's an irritant, but an irritant isn't always a negative. It's just something that's always on the mind. The outside pattern is a florid arabesque, reminding me of a fungus. If you can imagine a toadstool in joints, an interminable string of toadstools, budding and sprouting in endless convolutions, why, that is something like it. Again, all of this is about resisting order, going against reason and order. Arabesque, something from another land, something non-Western, something that challenges the cultural norms. Fungus is something that grows in shade and that grows on dead things and disobeys much of the rules of the plants that are in the sunlight, right? That is, sometimes there is one marked peculiarity about this paper, a thing nobody seems to notice but myself, and that is it changes as the light changes. That is why I watch it always. By moonlight, the moon shines in all night when there's a moon. I wouldn't know it's the same paper. At night, in any kind of light, in twilight, candlelight, lamplight, and worst of all by moonlight, it becomes bars. The outside pattern, I mean, and the woman behind it is as plain as can be. So you can see there's a separation between what's going on inside that wallpaper and what's going on inside or in the outside world. I didn't realize for a long time that the thing that was showed behind that dim sub-pattern, but now I'm quite sure it was a woman. By daylight, she is subdued, quiet. I fancy it is the pattern that keeps her so still. It's the reason, the structure that keeps her so still. And that cultivates deceit for, indeed, lost my place, one sec. I lie down ever so much now. John says it's good for me and sleep all I can. Indeed, he started the habit by making me lie down for an hour after each meal. So very rest cure-like. It is a very bad habit, I'm convinced, for you see, I don't sleep. And that cultivates deceit, for I don't tell them I'm awake. Oh, no. So she feels like she has to sleep because John's telling her, but she doesn't sleep. So she's being dishonest, she says. Fact is, I'm getting a little afraid of John. He seems very queer sometimes, and even Jenny has an inexplicable look. So this is another huge pivotal moment. She's starting to question the patriarchy and started to question the agents of that patriarchy. So Jenny said that the paper stained everything it touched, that she found yellow smooches on all my clothes and John's, and she wished she could be more careful. So those strange ideas, those ideas that challenge the norms, are everywhere. Get all over you. Don't let them escape. Don't let them wild. Life is very much more exciting now than it used to be. You see, I have something more to expect, to look forward to watch. I really do eat better and am more quiet than I was. John is so pleased to see me improve. He laughed a little the other day and said I seemed to be flourishing in spite of my wallpaper. I turned it off with a laugh. Another big pivotal moment. Throughout the first half of the story, the laughing is all done by John at her, belittling her. Here, she takes control. I turned it off with a laugh. I had no intention of telling him it was because of the wallpaper. He would make fun of me. He might even want to take me away. I don't want to leave now until I have found it out. There's a week more, but I think that'll be enough. I'm feeling so much better. I don't sleep at night, for it is so interesting to watch the developments, but I sleep a good deal in the daytime. So, that could be the supernatural, the vampire sleeping, but also just her embracing the moonlight, embracing the non-reason. There are always new shoots on the fungus and new shades of yellow all over it. But there's something else about the paper, the smell. I noticed it the moment we came in the room, but with so much sun and air, it was not so bad. Now we have a week of fog and rain, and whether the windows are open or not, the smell is here. It creeps all over the house. I find it hovering in the dining room, skulking in the parlor, hiding in the hall, lying in wait for me on the stairs. It gets into my hair. So what's all those words provoke? What ideas? Perhaps ghost-like, right? Monster-like. It gets everywhere, all-encompassing. It's hiding. It's coming for you. But she doesn't seem afraid of it. Even when I go to ride, if I turn my head suddenly in surprise, it's there, that smell. It used to disturb me at first. I thought seriously of burning the house to reach the smell. But now I'm used to it. The only thing I can think of is that it is like the color of paper, a yellow smell. So that's interesting, a yellow smell, right? That's a combination of two senses, sight, yellow, and smell. It's something called synesthesia when senses get crossed like that. But what is that on a different symbolic level, right? Normal logic reason says there's no such thing as a yellow smell. Those are two different things. Those are two different senses. Well, synesthesia is considered abnormal, challenging the norm, challenging the reason. The front pattern does move, and no wonder the woman behind it shakes it. Sometimes I think there are a great many women behind, and sometimes only one, and she crawls around fast and crawling and shakes all over. So a great many women, but sometimes only one. So this is that kind of universalizing. She's not just the main character of this story. She is all women, and they are one, right? So she represents femininity trying to struggle out from these structures. Then in the very bright spots, she keeps still, and in the very shady spots, she takes hold of the bars and shakes them hard, and she is all the time trying to climb through. But nobody could climb through that pattern it strangles, so I think that is why it has so many heads. They get through, and then the pattern strangles them off and turns them upside down and makes their eyes white. Right? So people who struggle against the norms, who struggle against the power structure, are doomed in many ways, because it's a world you can't escape from. It's how our world is organized, how our world's set up. But they keep doing it. Women keep challenging throughout history. They keep pushing the boundaries. They keep pushing and pushing and pushing. I think that woman gets out in the daytime, and I'll tell you why. Privately, I've seen her. I can see her out of every one of my windows. It's the same woman I know, for she's always creeping. Most women do not creep by daylight. So she's so challenging the norms that she's gone out and doing it in the daytime even. She's rejecting patriarchy in broad daylight. I see her in that long shaded line creeping up and down. I see her in those dark grape arbors creeping all around the garden. I see her on that long road underneath the trees creeping along, and when a carriage comes, she hides under the blackberry vines. I don't blame her a bit. It must be humiliating to be caught creeping by daylight. That anytime you challenge social norms, one tool to keep you in line is embarrassment, humiliation. Treat you as somebody who doesn't fit in, who's somebody who shouldn't be respected. I always lock the door when I creep by daylight. I can't do it at night, for I know John would suspect something at once. And John is so queer now that I don't want to irritate him. I wish he would take another room. Besides, I don't want anybody to get that woman out at night but myself. I often wonder if I could see her out of the windows all at once. I've watched her sometimes away off in the open country, creeping as fast as a cloud in the high wind. Right? Saying that this feminine resistance is increasing. Right? There are only 2 more days to get this paper off, and I believe John is beginning to notice. I don't like the look in his eyes. And I heard him ask Jenny a lot of professional questions about me. She had a very good report to give. She said I slept a good deal in the daytime. John knows I don't sleep very well at night, for I'm so quiet. He asked me all sorts of questions, too, and pretended to be very loving and kind, as if I couldn't see through him. Still, I don't wonder he acts so, sleeping under his paper for 3 months. It only interests me, but I feel sure John and Jenny are secretly affected by it. That those people who are challenging norms, the people who care about them, who are in their lives, are going to be impacted by that. Right? Jenny wanted to sleep with me, the sly thing, but I told her I should undoubtedly rest better at night all alone. That was clever, for really I wasn't alone a bit. As soon as it was the moonlight and that poor thing began to crawl and shake the pattern, I got up and ran to help her. I pulled and she shook, I shook and she pulled, and before morning we had peeled off yards of that paper. So she's now freeing both herself and the woman in the wallpaper. Jenny looked at the wall in amazement, but I told her merrily that I did it out of pure spite at the vicious thing. She laughed and said she wouldn't mind doing it herself, but I must not get tired. How she betrayed herself that time. Right, so talking about a woman who's internalized the social norms. I quite enjoy the room now is bare again. How about those children did tear about there? This bedstead is fairly gnawed. So again, add this to our descriptions. Chewed on bedstead. But I must get to work. I have locked the door and thrown the key down the front path. I don't want to go out, and I don't want anybody to come in until John comes. I want to astonish him. I've got a rope up there. Even Jenny did not find. If that woman does get out and tries to get away, I can tie her. But I forgot I could not reach far without anything to stand on. This bed will not move. I tried to lift and push it until I was lame, and then I got so angry I bit off a little piece of one corner, but it hurt my teeth. Then I peeled off the paper I could reach standing on the floor. It sticks horribly, and the pattern just enjoys it. All those strangled heads and bulbous eyes and waddling fungus growth just shriek with derision. I'm getting angry enough to do something desperate. To jump out the window would be an admirable exercise, but the bars are too strong to even try. Okay, we need to, besides I wouldn't do it, of course not. I know well enough that a step like that is improper and might be misconstrued. Okay, so we need to talk about that for a moment. And so prior in the story, there had been some foreshadowing about possible suicide or tragic ending. And here she's saying maybe it'd be admirable to do it, right? So on one level, you're saying, why would this woman do that? Why would this woman say this? Of course, suicide's not admirable. But there's this one element of literature that symbolically has used suicide, saying basically that in a patriarchal society, in a patriarchal world, there is no real place for women. That women who resist it will be marginalized, will be subjected to harsh criticism, will not be able to live a full, good life, and women who just go along with it aren't really able to be themselves. And so there's no way for women to exist in this world. And so there's been some great works of literature, like The Awakening by Kate Chopin, that, spoiler alert here, sorry, where it ends with her walking into the ocean, presumably committing suicide. But it's an act of betrayal. saying, I will not stand for your rules. I will not stand for your laws anymore. This world is not for me. I'm on to the next, right? Which symbolically, yes, admirable. In reality, though, we all know suicide not admirable. I don't like to look out the windows even. And when she says it might be misconstrued, right? Well, obviously, if she was to commit suicide here, they'd say, see, hysterical woman, right? I don't like to look out the windows even. There are so many of those creeping women, and they creep so fast. I wonder if they did all come out of that wallpaper as I did. I suppose I shall have to get back to behind the pattern when it comes at night, and that is hard. It is so pleasant to be out in this great room and creep around as I please. I don't want to go outside. I won't, even if Jenny asks me to. For outside, you have to creep on the ground, and everything is green instead of yellow. But here I can creep smoothly on the floor, and my shoulder just fits in the long smooch around the wall, so I cannot lose my way. Why, there's John at the door. It's no use, young man. You can't open it. How he does call and pound. So she's saying this so relaxed. Now he's crying for an axe. It would be a shame to break down that beautiful door. So she's calm as they're going crazy. They're going crazy at somebody who's resisting. Right? It would be a shame to break down the beautiful door. John, dear, said I in the gentlest voice. The key is down by the front steps under a plantain leaf. That silenced him for a few moments. Then he said, very quietly indeed, open the door, my darling. I can't, said I. The key is down by the front door under a plantain leaf. And then I said it again several times, very gently and slowly. So kind of creepy, calm, as all of their norms, social norms, are getting challenged. Those people who have accepted those norms are crazy, and she's calmly proceeding. And said it so often that he had to go and see, and he got it, of course, and came in. He stopped short by the door. What's the matter? He cried. For God's sake, what are you doing? I kept on creeping just the same, but I looked at him over my shoulder. I've got out at last, said I, in spite of you and Jane, and I've pulled off most of the paper, so now you can't put me back. Now why should that man have fainted? But he did, and right across my path by the wall, so I had to creep over him every time. Kind of a creepy ending there, right? Okay, so let's analyze this a bit and try to finish up for the day. So we talked a lot about the social commentary and the kind of allegorical elements of it. Who is the woman in the wallpaper? So is it the main character, of which, notice, never was given a name? Both universalizes it to say it's all women. Also is a commentary of women in that time period in a patriarchal society can't be themselves, can't have their own name. Who's the woman in the wallpaper? Is it her? Is it the narrator? Is it all women? Is it women? There's other possibilities. How is the act of tearing down the wallpaper a feminist act? Challenging social norms, right? Trying to resist the norms of society. What could her creeping around symbolize? Well, normal people don't creep, right? Normal people don't walk like that, act like that. That's abnormal. And so if you want to resist social norms, you have to act in an abnormal way. And not only does she act in an abnormal way, but now she's acting in a abnormal way in front of others. And how does point of view impact this story? So think about that for a minute. Whose point of view are we getting the story from? This nameless narrator, right? What do we know about this nameless narrator? Perhaps she's mentally unstable. Perhaps she's emotional or hysterical or whatever else, right? We've challenged that quite a bit. But so is she a reliable narrator? Can we trust everything she says and does? Not really. Not really. There's enough in there that says, you know what, she might not be giving us that story quite right. It doesn't change the social commentary or any of that, but she's not a reliable narrator. So we can't trust her version of all those events, right? We've talked a lot about this, her trying to get out of the domestic pattern of life, the social constructs. But, let's see, I think we've talked a lot about this. By tearing down, we'll come back to the point of view question in a moment. By tearing down the yellow wallpaper, the narrator emerges from the wallpaper and asserts her own identity, albeit a somewhat confused, seemingly insane one, by normal society looking insane. Though she must crawl around the room, the woman in the wallpaper crawls around. This creeping is the first stage in a feminist uprising. We all must resist. We all must act against social norms. And so, get away from the actual act of creeping and say, in general, in order for this to stop, we all must come together as one and challenge social norms. Okay, so how does the point of view impact this story? It's a first-person narration focusing exclusively on our own thoughts, feelings, and perceptions. Everything that we learn or see in the story is filtered through the narrator's shifting consciousness. And since the narrator goes insane over the course of the story, her perception of reality is often completely at odds with the other characters. The point of view of the narrator is essential in understanding the feelings and emotions that she's experiencing. All right. So you probably can't piece together the actual facts of the events from this unreliable narrator's account, right? It's so tied in with her psychology, with her mental, emotional state, that there's no way we can get an actual reporting of events. The narrator describes the odor of the wallpaper as a yellow smell. We talked about that. So, given this point of view, an unreliable narrator must ask the following. Why are there bars on the windows? Why are there teeth marks on her bed? Is she really on vacation? Is John really her husband? Where is she? Okay. So if you were to go back and look at this story again, and you looked at all those parts of the description, the bars, the gates, the little houses, the bed that's chained to the floor, the locks on the doors, the bars on the windows, the doors being locked, John going away all the time, the Jenny coming in and keeping close tabs on her and writing down about her progress. Well, what if Jenny's really a nurse and John's a doctor? As well, he is, but what if he's not really her husband? What if she's at the Vera Mitchell or some sort of mental institution? And this unreliable narrator is making this story about being married to him, but he's really just the doctor, right? And there's a lot of evidence for that. There's a lot of evidence that perhaps she's in an asylum, perhaps she's in the Vera Mitchell facility. And so one reason I love this story is not just for all the social commentary and all the begging the reader to challenge social norms, but it really gets at this idea of how powerful point of view can be, right? And that you always have to ask, is this reliable narrator, someone reliable, someone we can trust? If so, or if not, what does that mean, right? So we could go back and we could read the story just surface level as it is, or you could say, holy crap, maybe that wasn't really what was going on. And that's the power of point of view. So Gilman was able to alter medical practices with the yellow wallpaper and says that she was saved one woman from a similar fate. so terrifying her family that they let her out into normal activity and she recovered. She was also using it to represent the oppression of women in a masculine society. Also, the doctor that had applying the rest cure to, so Ver Mitchell, ended up altering his treatment after this text. So she actually changed society and helped people by using writing as a tool for her own therapy, for reaching out to others. And it also made, in the real world, symbolic figures of patriarchy rethink what they were doing. And so that's metafiction for the power of literature and the power of art and the part of pop culture and music to challenge social norms and actually change things in the world. Gilman was later diagnosed with breast cancer, and she ended up killing herself rather than letting others be in charge of her life. So again, I must emphasize that is not a courageous act. It's a sad act, a tragic act, but it fits with her her lifelong quest to not let others control her. Okay, so we'll finish up there. And I know an intense text, a long one for discussion. Thanks for bearing with my voice problems. Go take the quiz. And we are now in the final week of the class. So I will have a video with instructions for the final up shortly. Thanks.